Hello, everybody. Hi. Can you please tell me that you can hear me okay and that you can see me okay? Hi. Yes, you can hear me and see me. Well, that's a great start. So it's wonderful to see so many people from all over the world. Lots of people from different countries in South America. We've got Carol from Wales. I'm from Wales, but I live in Spain. And people from other countries around the world, Romania, Syria, Poland, the Basque Country, which is just down the road from me now, Moldova, lots of places. I haven't got time to read out all the countries, but it's really reassuring and it's quite special to have people from so many places. So we're going to be looking at some ideas for how to include more practice, how to include practice in every single lesson for all 4 skills. Okay, this is a plan for the webinar. So I'm going to talk about getting organized to make sure that we kind of are able to check that we're giving skills practice. I'm going to look at some practical activities, hopefully share some ideas either that are new or that you haven't remembered for some time, reminding you of some activities connected with young learner classes, so connected with routines, classroom routines, things I've called add-ons, so an extra stage to an existing activity, things we can do quickly and easily with images and also with a board, a whiteboard or a blackboard. I always try and find activities that are easy to set up and that don't require a lot of extra work, because I know that teachers are very busy and they have a lot to do. And even though some ideas might be wonderful, if they involve a lot of extra work, then that kind of defeats the object for me. And then we'll finish by summing up. I'll share some ideas about staying organized, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So really this idea came about because teachers were asking, I think teachers feeling overwhelmed sometimes because we are told that we need to talk about or we need to address things like 21st century skills, digital literacy, values, education. We've got the curriculum to deal with, the school syllabus. Maybe we are preparing young learners for an exam. And sometimes because we're so overwhelmed by all these things we need to be doing, we might feel that we're not actually practicing the skills enough in the classroom. I think that actually, probably when we think about it, we are practicing the skills, every skill in every lesson. And we'll see that as we go through today. But first of all, I'm going to I'm going to invite you to take part in a survey, in a little poll. So I'd like you to think about which of the skills in your experience gets most neglected in the classroom. Okay, so this is an interesting question, I think. When I thought about it myself and my own teaching experience, I thought that it was probably listening. But then I was thinking about listening in terms of the audio resources in the classroom and not really all the listening that your students do when they're listening to the teacher, etc. So, and I think probably things are changing as we're using more and more internet resources. But it's interesting to see what teachers in different parts of the world think as well. We're not doing that right now, obviously, because it's just one poll. But it's interesting to see that, well, the highest here at the moment is speaking. That's interesting because this morning when we did the same webinar, the highest was actually writing. Now, this might be because people were connected from different parts of the world, from more Asia, from China and Vietnam, etc. So maybe there's something there that influences what we do in the classroom. And I suppose the bigger the class size, the less opportunities we have for short and sharp speaking practices, for example. So just carry on voting, and we'll come back and look at this at the end. But it seems roughly from this poll that the what gets most neglected in the classroom, according to this group, is speaking. That's good for me because I'm going to be giving you plenty of ideas, I hope, of introducing extra speaking practice in your lessons. And as Analia is saying here, it depends on the kind of writing activities. Of course it does. It's a very broad term, isn't it, when we say something like speaking or writing or reading, because reading can also mean short things. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a whole book or a whole text. It can just be a series of sentences. So let's move on then, and let's make a start and talk about getting organized. So I think that a good place to start, if we are keen on making sure that we address all of the skills in every lesson, the place to start is at the beginning. And the beginning of a lesson, if you like, is what goes on just before that lesson. And this is when you have your course book, your class book, or your materials that you're going to use, and your lesson plan. Okay, so not everybody will be using a course book, I understand that, and not everybody writes a lesson plan, I understand that too. But I would say that a good thing to consider would be that when you're planning your lesson and when you're looking at your materials just before you go into the classroom, it might be a good idea to add a skills column, if you like, on your lesson plan, so that you can actually highlight the skills that you're going to be practicing. Sometimes this is really easy because at the top of the page it will say writing practice or listening practice. But sometimes you have to look a little bit more closely at the materials, and you might spot that there's actually a speaking section that follows a writing, etc. And when you've done this, you can see then clearly which skill might be neglected, and you can then choose an activity to add into the lesson to make sure that it's addressed. Okay, but I think the first stage is actually to think about the lesson and to think about what you're including so that you can notice what you're not including. It might seem very obvious. I think it is obvious, it's common sense, but sometimes we've got so much going on that we kind of forget the simple things. So first of all, I'm going to have a look at some ideas, some very simple ideas of how to include more skills practice in routines, classroom routines. All young learner classes have routines, and I know that some teachers use routines as a way of managing the class and structuring the class. And I've seen some teachers do wonderful things with routines throughout the lessons. So let's just have a look at a couple of ideas. So you might have a lesson, you might have at the beginning of a lesson, a simple routine could be a very, very simple speaking activity where you simply ask a question to each of the children as they come into the class. Okay, this is just one example. So how are you feeling today, Thomas? And Thomas will answer, I'm feeling today because, yeah. So we can give them the support, we can write the speech bubbles on the board, we can give them a model to follow. But if this does become a routine, then as the days and weeks go by, you won't need to show these models because they'll know exactly what to say and they'll be practicing more and more different structures and language as you go on. So again, this isn't sort of rocket science, but it's a simple way to make sure that you add a short speaking activity. Speaking activities don't need to be long or complicated. In fact, I think that most of the best speaking activities are short and simple and manageable, and you can do a number of them throughout the lesson instead of just doing one long speaking activity, if you like. So another routine, and we're going to do this now. Some of you will have heard of exit tickets, some of you won't. I'll explain exactly what they are now. But I'd like you to write in the chat box the ending to this sentence that I've started. Okay, so after this webinar, I'm going to, so please write what you're going to do when you finish this webinar. Okay, so an exit ticket is something that each learner has to do or give you, if you like, before they are allowed to leave the lesson, the classroom. And this can be a speaking task, or it can be a writing task, as I've just given you now. So they can write something and stick it on the board with a post-it or whatever, or they can actually say something. But until they do this, they won't be allowed to leave the lesson, to leave the classroom, okay? And again, it's a routine, so you can change this every day. You can have something, you can ask them to say, for example, 3 words that they learned in the lesson, something they enjoyed, what they're going to have for lunch, depending on the class time, obviously. So again, that's very, very simple. And what happens, I think, when we do this is sometimes we pique the curiosity of our learners, because I know that what I want to do now, I want to read your answers in the chat box. And I haven't got time to do that right now, but I will go back later to do it. And that's what happens in a real class situation too. So if you're writing and putting post-its up, the children will be looking to see what the other classmates have written. And if you're speaking, then hopefully they'll be listening too. And they might say, oh, I'm doing that too. And they might get involved in the dialogue, if you like. So again, a very, very simple routine that can be added to any lesson. Excuse me. So another routine that I quite like is to use choice boards. I don't know if you're familiar with choice boards. One of the rights of the child from the United Nations says something like, all children have the right to participate in choosing when the matter of choice is going to directly affect them. They say it a little bit more eloquently than that. But this is an opportunity for adding some choice to the lesson. So this can be done as a routine after every unit. So in this case, I've chosen a choice board. I've created a choice board that I would use after a unit on the topic of friends. Okay, so usually for primary kids and for secondary, I think, units are usually, they have a theme or a topic. So here, for example, we've got 6 options, and these will tap into the students' preferences. Somebody will like to write a poem, somebody will like to draw a picture and label it, somebody might want to do a speaking activity. This can be done for homework or in the lesson. And the whole point about it for today, while we're talking about skills, is that if we use a choice board as a regular routine, the good thing about routines, of course, is that we won't need to explain every time what the children have to do. They'll already know when they've done it a few times. And the idea is that they stand at the choice board, maybe on a classroom wall, and they will discuss with the person next to them. They will say which activity they're going to choose and why. And this makes it into a very short and simple speaking activity, as well as going on to do the actual activity. Okay, so any routines like this are opportunities to add a little bit of a skill, in this case, maybe speaking. You'll all know this, you'll be familiar with this, show and tell, micro teaching, we call it many things. Show and tell is the best thing, I think. So this is where we can have some personalization if we want to, or we can simply keep things quite vague and invite students to show and tell the class something. So this can be structured, or more or less structured, if you like. So we can say, for example, if they're learning about food, we can ask them to bring in something, an empty packet or something from home, something they've eaten over the weekend, etc. Or if we're talking about families, they might bring in a photo of somebody in their family. And we can make it give them support. So we can say, for example, tell us 3 things or tell us 1 thing. We can actually give them the beginnings of the sentence. This is do-do-do. I like it because do-do-do. And the more support, obviously, for the younger students or students with lower levels. So routines like show and tell, you could set this up, for example, so that everybody in the class has 1 chance once a term or once a month. The other children could be encouraged to ask questions. That would be up to you. At the end of the day, you'd have to mold these activities to suit your own environment and your own context. Another routine that I really like using with all classes actually, but with young learners especially, are journals. Now, for me, a journal can be whatever you decide to make it, okay? So it doesn't just have to be text. You can get your students to use it as a sketch notes journal where they would draw pictures, write things, keep a record of things, and you can decide how and when they use the journal, because that will then become a routine. So maybe at the end of a lesson, maybe at the beginning of a lesson, maybe halfway through a lesson, maybe for homework, okay? And obviously this is an opportunity to do some writing, but it's also an opportunity to do some speaking, because they could then ask and they could show each other their journals and maybe ask 1 question about something. And you can adapt it to suit your needs, and not only your needs, but your students' preferences. Okay, so I would say that when it comes to journals, the fewer fixed rules that you have, the better. Okay, but you can get them to keep a self-evaluation in the journal. I think my work today was great or okay, whatever. But journals are very useful. This is another routine, and some of you will have heard of this, and it's called Dear Time. If you've heard of this expression, the D, E, A, and R stand for something, and it's connected with reading. So if you know what it is, please write it in the chat box. What these letters stand for, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. Some of you haven't heard about it, okay? So this is an idea that started in the United States, and you've got one. Lyat has got everything. Drop everything and read. So drop everything and read. So this means exactly what it says. So you have a routine in the class where you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Again, you decide. You decide how often, you decide when. And the idea is you say it's dear time, and everybody stops what they're doing. They drop everything and they pick up their reading matter. So in the first time you set this up, you have to explain the rules a little bit. If you go onto Google, you can find more explanations about this. But you are supposed to set an example too. So it's not only the children who will be reading, but you as the teacher will be setting an example. And the whole thing is about reading for pleasure. So they can choose anything to read for those 5 or 10 minutes. So they can choose maybe an extended reading text from the course book that you will not have time to read during the class, maybe a graded reader, maybe a blog post, maybe something they bring in from home. It doesn't matter. The whole point is they choose, again, what they want to read. They're not reading the same thing. Everybody has made a personal choice. And what will happen, inevitably, as in the real world, when the activity stops, when you say, okay, time is up now, after 8 minutes or whatever, curiosity will start creeping in, and the pupils will want to know what the other person's been reading, and you can again build in a speaking task there. You can ask people to just say, tell the person next to them what they're reading, or show and tell again. but it becomes a routine. You can also get them to extend it to have a writing activity where they might write in their journal one sentence about what they've just read, this kind of thing, like a short review or whatever, or one interesting thing they've just read. I've done this with hundreds of classes, hundreds, and I would say that 80% of the time it's worked and 20% of the time it hasn't worked. But until you try it, you won't know if it will work, okay? So it's a great thing, I think, to try and experiment with. And if even 2 or 3 pupils from your class become interested in reading for pleasure because of this, then I think it's worth doing, and you can pat yourself on the back. That's what happens in lots of my classes. Some children start discovering the joy of reading. Okay, so I'm moving swiftly on now to add-ons. I've called this section add-ons because in this context, what I'm talking about here is a short activity that you can literally add on to another activity that already exists, okay? And you will see for yourself, if you look through the class book that you're using, your course book or materials, if you stop every now and then after some activities and think to yourself, what short activity could I add on to this activity to practice another skill or the same skill, you will come up with some ideas of your own, okay? So hopefully I can show you some ideas now, and also you can start thinking of your own ideas. So here are some ideas to try after a speaking activity. So when you've got a speaking activity in the book, and here number 3, for example, it says, think about the questions, then tell your partner the answers. And we've got 2 questions. If you had a tail, what would you use it for, etc. So this is a very simple speaking activity. So after this activity, you don't have to just stop and close the book or turn the page over or do something completely unrelated. You can think of a little add-on activity. So one thing can be to retell what you've just been speaking about to a new audience. So what I mean by that is to change partners and to tell your new partner what your previous partner said when they answered those questions, okay? Not only in this context, but in lots of speaking contexts, speaking activities. So you speak to A and B, speak together, and then A speaks to C and tells them what B said, etc. The good thing about retelling with a new audience is that the language, then you are revising it, you're practicing it. You've already said it once, so you kind of, you feel a little bit more, or the students feel a little bit more confident about using it again. You can also write a summary, okay? So in this particular example, after having this dialogue with your partner, you could go away and write down what you remember about their answers. And it doesn't matter if they don't remember everything accurately, because that's not the point. The point is that they are writing, and then you can have an example of their writing, and you might decide to correct it or look at it and respond to it in some way. You can give peer feedback, so you can get your children to respond to what somebody's just said, basically. And this can be done in writing or speaking. Just something, you can have a poster maybe with some responses, oral responses, like "that's really interesting" or "I love what you just said," this kind of thing, just to encourage them to respond and speak and be positive as well about each other's efforts and not always critical. And you can ask and answer questions, so you can ask further questions about whatever it is that you've been speaking about. So that's after a speaking activity. And now after a writing activity, so you can start getting the idea. So here's an example here. This is writing a report, and this can lead to other activities. The obvious thing for me after a writing activity is to have some kind of reading activity where we will use the students' generated texts, the writings that they've just done, to create some kind of a reading activity. So this PW is pair work, by the way. So read and say. So for example, if somebody has written a report in this case, the pupils might exchange books, read each other's reports, and then say something about them. Something they found interesting, something they liked, something they disagree with, something they agree with. You can give or leave out as much prompting as you feel necessary. Another thing is to write questions. So if this is a writing activity, obviously. So after a writing, exchange writings, or put them up around the wall, or display them in some kind of way, and then get the pupils to read one of them and to write some questions, like comprehension questions, about what they're writing. Okay, and then the person who wrote the writing could actually answer them, or this could be done written or spoken, so that the activity doesn't just end with the writing, it continues in some way. Things sometimes we can act out, so this would obviously depend on the kind of writing. So with a story, that sometimes lends itself to things being acted out. And I'm sure that you've got lots of other ideas. Okay, so I'm moving briefly on, and I'm trying to look at some of your comments too, and you're writing lots of wonderful things there, which I'm going to go back and read later. Layat, you've said, what is the textbook you're using? Well, this textbook here is the new text, is the new primary course book that's not yet been written. It's being written as we speak. So hopefully it'll be out next year, and you'll be able to see it. So here are some ideas after a reading activity. And again, you'll be starting to get the idea here. And there are lots of ideas. So one of them is retelling again. Okay, so you read something, or your pupils read something, and then they retell what they have read. And it doesn't matter if they have all read the same thing. It doesn't matter at all. So you can put them into pairs, and they can take turns to retell sentence by sentence, more or less, the information that they've just read. And I wouldn't be too hard on correcting them at doing something like this, because what they're doing, they're transferring information, they're reading something, they're thinking about it. That's a very important skill to be developing as well. And then they are retelling it in their own words. And if they get details wrong, they'll probably correct each other, or it might not be that important. But the idea is that they're transferring information and retelling something together. Another idea is to write a diary entry as a character in whatever you've read. Obviously, this works particularly well with a story. So even a very simple story in a primary course book, or a one-page comic story or a text, you can choose, or the pupils can choose which character they are from that story, and then they can write a diary entry. And it doesn't have to be long. When I talk about some of these add-ons, they don't have to be 20-minute activities. They can be 5-minute activities. A diary entry can be 3 lines. It doesn't have to be a whole page. So they might say how they feel after the events in the story, or they might describe something from the story from their perspective. And it's also good to develop skills like empathy, because they have to put themselves into the shoes of another person and think about things from another perspective. And that's something that we should be encouraging, I think, because sometimes we don't always put ourselves in other people's positions, and we need to, I think, develop that kind of a skill. We might write a review, or they might write a review. And again, when I say review, this can be something very, very simple. So you can even give them a skeleton on the board of a text, which they have to copy and complete at the lowest ages and levels. Yes, so I think this story was blank. The best part was, yeah, something like this. And obviously the better they are at English, and the better they level, and the older they are, the less structure you might need. But I think giving them structure and models is always a good thing to do. You can give them some discussion questions. So you can have a speaking activity after a reading activity. So this can be very simple. It can be one question. Do you agree with the writer? Or what do you think the writer feels about something? You know, this kind of thing. Obviously, you'd have to grade it depending on the age group. So Rosalia is asking suggestions for kids 6 and 7. So I think a discussion questions for 6 and 7. So imagine you read a text about typical food in a certain celebration. Then you can maybe a discussion could be, what do you prefer, this kind of food or the kind of food in the text? And they or which kind of foods you'd have for a celebration. Obviously, when you look at the text itself, you'll get ideas yourself. And again, you can act out things from reading. Wanted posters. This is an idea that I got from my good friend Cheryl Palin, and she explained that this is something she did in class after reading a story. And what she did, she got her kids to write wanted posters. So this is a writing that comes after a reading. And what they did, they chose a character from the story, and they draw a picture, like a wanted picture, and they write wanted across the top. You can probably find a template on Google if you look for one. And then you have to write a description, like in a real wanted poster, and you know why they're wanted. And Dagmar is saying that this is hard to do in a big class. I think that some things are easier to do with big classes, some things are harder to do. I totally recognize this. I think with a wanted poster, when I say a poster, I'm talking about in their notebooks, in the books that they normally write in, or on a piece of paper. This could be something I think that should be manageable. And depending on how many children you've got in your class, obviously you might be able to display them afterwards, or that might not be practical for some people. But it might be something you could try, okay? And if it doesn't work, fine. But it's a good idea to try things sometimes. And let's move on. So after a listening activity. Okay, so we've got lots of audios. Every course book these days comes with an audio with CDs, etc. And there are also other places where you can find them. So very often we do a listening activity, and then we don't use that audio again. We don't usually go back and use audios that we've used before in the course book. So for my suggestions here for listening, I decided to make all of them ideas for add-ons for more listening, okay? Things you can do with the audio, with the same audio that you've used, or going back if you decide that you need to add more listening, to get an audio that you've already used, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and used again in a number of different ways, fresh ways. So here's one idea. So you put the words or pictures in order. So what you would do as a teacher, you would look at the audio script, and you would, depending on the type of script it is, you would select 4 or 5 or 6 words and write them on the board in a jumbled order. Or if they're nouns and you could draw them, you could draw them on the board, or you could use flashcards or pictures. And you play the audio, and the children have to listen and write and order the, when they hear that word, they have to number that picture. Okay, so it's very straightforward. It's very easy, I think. Bingo is another one. This is very, very easy to set up again, but you have to be careful with bingo using an audio. So what you have to do is look at the audio script and choose about, I don't know, say 15 words, but make sure that you get 5 words from the beginning, 5 words from the middle, and 5 words from the end. And then you jumble them all up and you write them on the board, and you ask the children to select maybe 5 words, whatever, 9 words, whatever. And then you play the audio and they listen, and when they hear the words, they cross them off and play bingo. Okay, and it's good fun, and you don't have to actually spend much time planning it, because you've got the audio script, you've got the audio, and if it's an audio that they've used before for a previous lesson, they'll already be familiar with the language, so that will help. It's a good idea for revising structures and vocabulary. Lots of audios are dialogues, especially with very young learners and young learners. So this is another idea where you again select a number of words, topics, themes, or you could draw pictures, and they have to listen, and then they have to say who said whatever, who mentioned pencil, who mentioned taxi, for example, and they write A or B, or the names if they know the names, obviously. So again, these are ideas that you'll have seen before, I'm sure, and sometimes we actually put them on the page. But we can't put all of the ideas that we have on the page. So as a writer, for example, I might be told that we have to have 3 activities on the page, but I might think of 6 or 7 or 8. And this is where you, as teachers, can be materials writers as well, and you can extend what's on the page, because you'll all have ideas and you'll all be familiar with the kinds of activities. Usually if you look at an audio script, you'll see immediately the kind of thing that might work with that audio script, okay? And again, there's another one here, which of these things is not mentioned? That's quite a nice one, I think, as well. So they have to listen very, very carefully for detail to be able to see and spot what is not mentioned. So moving on now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about images. So images, pictures are a great way of introducing some extra skills practice to any stage of a lesson, okay? And they're great for loads of reasons, but basically we're surrounded by images. You've got images in your course book. You can go back and use images that you've used in previous units. You've got storybooks in your classrooms, I'm sure. There are images, as I say, all around us, photos, drawings. One nice thing to do is to actually use your children's drawings, so get them to draw things, and then use their drawings in class. So let's have a look at a couple of ideas that we can do using an image. Okay, and I'm sure that you'll have loads more ideas, so I'm just going to give you 3 ideas that you can do. So the first idea is, I've called this answers and questions, okay, not questions and answers, because normally what you might do with a picture, you might hold the picture up at the front of the class and ask some questions. So I've turned that upside down. This is one of my favorite activities, and I'm going to give you an answer, and I would like you now to write in the chat box what the question is. So that's the first answer. Outside in a patio. So, question, okay? So this is the answer, you write the question. Where are they? Where are the children? Where are the kids? Okay, so as you can see, there's not just one correct answer. And that's good, okay? Because what happens is with this activity, they'll start comparing their questions and asking if they're right. We've got another one here. This is a little bit more obscure. Yes, they are. So can you write, okay, so are they happy? Are they drawing? Are they playing? Are they friends? Are they having fun? As you can see, you're coming up with a whole load of wonderful language there, and you're practicing that particular sentence structure. So you can actually practice grammar in this way as well. This can be done as a spoken activity or a written activity. It doesn't matter. Okay. You can turn it into a game and have groups doing it together, so you can come up with the most interesting question. And the last one there, pink. So again, you've got people writing multiple answers there, and you'll come up with what colour is, what colour are, etc., etc. And again, there are different questions. They're all correct. Okay, so that's one very simple answer. And it's good to practice question forms. Another one is to find a picture with a number of different people. Okay, so here we've got a picture with 4 people. And this is about being taken on an alternative persona. And this is quite good because sometimes personalization activities are good, and sometimes it's better to move away, I think, and allow children to imagine that they're somebody else and take on a new persona. So in this case, for example, and I'm sure you can find pictures in your class books too of groups of people. So that bottom bit there, yes, they are. That shouldn't be there. That's an error of mine, I'm afraid. So here we've got a writing activity, and they've got the beginnings of some sentences. So that's me. I'm wearing, my name is, I'm with, and depending on who they have chosen from that photo, their writings will be different, yeah? And we can extend this. We can extend it. I'm feeling, we're going to, etc., etc. You can extend it. And there are lots of other things you can do in a similar way by taking on a different persona. Because by giving them a new persona, you're allowing them to be anything they want to be, and without the limitations of their own contexts. Sometimes their context might be wonderful, but very often, sadly, they aren't wonderful contexts. So here we can allow them to dream a little bit and use their imagination and creativity. So I'm just checking here. Okay, so the third activity here, and again, this is not not rocket science, as they say, but it's a memory game. And this is one of my favorite activities for classes. So I'm going to give you a minute. You've already given you 10 seconds, I think, to look at this picture, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about it, okay? So have a look at that picture. And now I'm taking it away. And I'm trying to read your comments at the same time. And Sylvia, you just said about the alternative persona can work well with agent students. I think with students who don't like to talk about themselves, it's always a good idea to say, pretend to be somebody else. If you're a boy, be a girl. If you're young, be old, yeah? So the memory, let's see if you can remember. What shape is the bed? Write your answers in the chat box, please. And again, this can be done as a writing activity or a spoken activity. How many starfish are in the bed? 2, 3. Okay, we've got different answers here. And what color is the clock? And this activity, of course, you can do this activity, but also if you do this as a routine activity, you can actually get your students, your classes, to make their own. So they can find a picture, write 3 memory questions, and they can give this class. Yeah, they can actually teach their peers in turn, this kind of thing. It's great fun to let them do a bit of teaching as well. I'm going to show you the picture again now to see if you were right. Okay, so the bed is round. There's 2 starfish. And what was the other one? What colour is the clock? The clock is white. Okay, it's not very clear. The clock is on the table. Okay, so this kind of thing, the more you do it, you'll notice that the children start paying great attention to the pictures. I'm going to move swiftly on, very, very quickly, to a couple of ideas for board activities. And these are activities that I've taken from a good friend of mine, Ana Pires in Portugal. And she has given me 3 ideas that she does with her classes. And she's given me some photos as well, okay? All children like writing on the boards. I don't know, I've never met a child who doesn't like writing on the board. And I know that sometimes it's not practical in some contexts, but where it is possible, I would encourage it at certain times, okay? So in this activity, what Anna does, at the beginning of the lesson, she writes a question on the board. So here in the example, she's written, "How are you today?" And the children will come in and they will draw a response to that question. They won't write a response, they will draw a response, okay? Obviously, she's got a small group here, so it's much more manageable. And then the children will sit around in a circle and they will talk about the picture. And they always include the teacher and they talk about how they're feeling. So they're not writing anything, they're just drawing, and then they're using the picture to ask questions and have a little chat, if you like, about how they're all feeling. It's very, very simple. The next picture is quite similar. So this is where she gets the children to draw a scene, a picture on the board, and she leads them into it and helps them if they need help, but usually they don't need help. They just decide what they're going to draw, and they'll draw different elements, and they might not be at all connected. But then when it's finished, they'll sit down and they look at the board, and together with the teacher, they will develop a story. By story here, I mean like a description of what the scene is showing. So the teacher might point and ask questions, they might explain, etc. But the idea is that it's collaborative, they're working together, they're working in, you know, as a group. They could do this on paper as well, of course, but I think the board thing is just something that it's nice, especially with smaller groups. This is another idea that Anna had, and it worked very well. So they were talking about homes and houses in their class book. That's what they were covering. So she drew a street, and she asked them to draw their own house in that street. And they all drew their own houses. They wrote their names. They drew Anna, the teacher's house there as well. And afterwards, again, they spoke about who lives next to who, and they described their houses a little bit. And Anna, what was quite nice was one little boy said to Anna afterwards, "Wouldn't it be really nice if we all lived together in a street like this?" I thought that was really lovely because it showed that what they thought of their teacher, who's obviously much loved by her students. So there are 3 activities, and just coming to the end now, so summing up a little bit. So I think the most important thing is for us to be aware of skills work. Okay, so to think a little bit about reading and writing and speaking and listening, and notice where we're doing it. One idea I had actually, which I haven't put on a slide, is that you could actually ask your pupils to help you out there. You could maybe appoint a pupil for each lesson, one or for a couple of lessons, to do some kind of experiment, if you like, and you could ask them to, you could ask one child to make a note every time they were being asked to speak, and another child to make a note every time they were being asked to listen, etc. And then to feed back at the end of the class, because probably you're doing more skills work and skills development than you realize. But your pupils will realize because they are the ones who are being asked to do these things. Okay, I think that'd be, if I was in a classroom now, I might try that out myself. And then I think this is a simple framework here that we can use, I think. So we said at the beginning we could add a skills section to our lesson plan so that we actually make a note of what skills are being developed. Highlight the explicit skills focus in the class book. So if we're doing a reading spread, we know that's reading, but also look for the implicit skills, the small extra activities where the pupils are asked to speak or to write something, because that's reading, writing practice, speaking practice, etc. And then make a note of any skill that we think is being neglected and think about where we can add some in. And here are just two ideas of graphic organizers that you could use, where you keep an eye on yourself, I suppose, and keep a record of when you are doing reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so if you use something color-coded like this, and color in a section each time you do reading, or if you do a lot of reading, color in 2 sections, etc., then at the end of the day you can look and you can see where you might need to include extra practice. So I know that I like using graphic organizers where I can, and I find them helpful when something is very visual. And this might help some of you, something like this. So either a round circle of this kind or a bar chart. And we've got 6 minutes left, or 5 or 6 minutes left at the end here for any questions. So please, if you do have a question, I'll try and answer. I'm going to be writing a blog post for the National Geographic Learning blog about this very topic. I'll write about the things I've mentioned and add in things that I haven't had time to talk about. So I'll answer some of your questions there if I haven't got round time to do it now. But please, if you've got anything you'd like to ask me, write it in the chat box. Thank you for your warm messages and comments. It's much appreciated. And please, if there's anything that you would like to challenge me about and say, you know, I can't possibly do this with my students, then do so, because I do understand that some of us are working in a privileged context and some of us are working in very difficult contexts where it's not always easy to do things that like pair work or certain things when we have huge classes. Okay, I know that's a problem. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you so much. What about bigger students aged 18? Georgiana says there. I would say that most things that work for primary classes work in exactly the same way for older kids. Obviously, the language they'll be using will be different and the topics that are interesting for them will be different. But I don't think there's anything that I've mentioned today that I wouldn't try with students who are older, 18, and even adults, okay? Because just because we're adults, it doesn't mean to say that we don't like drawing, we don't like playing games, we don't like sometimes using our imagination and being creative. Obviously, you know your students better than anybody else does, so you can be the judge of that. Yeah, I think that you should be able to, as teachers, very often we are adapting materials anyway and adapting ideas. So maybe an idea that I've given you today is not appropriate as I've explained it, but maybe with a little tweak or by changing something or adding something or taking it away, it might work. Exactly. So Adriana's saying we just have to adapt the activities for older students, and I think you're right. And sometimes when you're just thinking about these things, I mean, the fact that you've come to the webinar today shows how dedicated you are as professionals. And I think that hopefully I might have reminded you of other ideas that you'd forgotten about, maybe some things that I don't know. So when I write the blog, I would invite you all to read the blog post, and if you've got any other ideas, then to comment and share those ideas, because that's another thing. We should be collaborating more, we should be sharing ideas more, and practicing what we preach, because we tell our students to help each other, to work together and to collaborate. And as teachers, we should be doing exactly the same thing. I firmly believe that. So and I'm going to enjoy reading back through the chat box that I've missed while I've been speaking, so that I can get some ideas from you, who are the experienced teachers here today. There are a lot of years of experience in this webinar room at the moment, hundreds of years of experience between us all. There's 157 participants, all with ideas and good things to share. And that's quite a special, nice thought, I think, to finish with.